At 11:58 a.m. on February 18, 1944, Group Captain Percy Charles Pickard stood beside his de Havilland Mosquito FB-6 at RAF Hunsdon, watching ground crews arm the fastest bomber in the Royal Air Force for a mission that had to succeed in exactly 4 minutes, or 258 French resistance fighters would die by firing squad at dawn. 38 years old, 102 combat missions, 0 prison breaks attempted from the air. The target was Amiens prison in occupied France. 700 prisoners held inside, 258 of them sentenced to death. French resistance members, SOE agents, political prisoners. The Germans had scheduled mass executions for February 19th. Gestapo interrogators wanted one more night to extract information. After that, the prisoners were expendable. Pickard commanded 140 Wing, a specialist low-level strike unit. His Mosquitos had hit targets across occupied Europe, railway junctions, Gestapo headquarters, V-weapon facilities. But this mission was different. The target wasn't a building to destroy, it was a building to open. Precision, not devastation. Breach the walls without collapsing the entire structure. Kill the guards without killing the prisoners. Create an escape opportunity in the middle of a German-occupied town in broad daylight. The mission planning had taken 6 weeks. RAF photographic reconnaissance Spitfires had flown over Amiens 17 times since January 1st. Each mission produced detailed images of the prison layout. The main building sat in the center of a rectangular compound, 3-story structure, solid stone construction, 19th century French architecture. The prisoners were held in 2 long wings extending from the main building at right angles. The north wing housed common criminals. The south wing held political prisoners, resistance fighters, captured SOE agents. The prison walls formed a rectangle 15 feet high, 3 feet thick at the base. Guard towers at each corner. The main gate faced Route d'Albert to the south. A single road provided access. The compound sat on the northern edge of Amiens, half a mile from the city center. Open fields surrounded 3 sides. A residential neighborhood bordered the 4th side to the east. British intelligence had received information through resistance networks that 258 prisoners in the south wing were scheduled for execution. The Germans had been conducting interrogations for weeks. Torture, sleep deprivation, threats against families. Some prisoners had broken, others had not. The Gestapo had decided to eliminate all political prisoners before they could be liberated by Allied forces advancing from Normandy in the coming months. The resistance sent a desperate message through SOE channels in early February. The prisoners had to be freed. Many possessed critical intelligence about German defensive positions, troop movements, collaborator networks. If they died, that intelligence died with them. More importantly, these were people who had risked everything fighting the occupation. Britain could not abandon them. Air Vice Marshal Basil Embry, commander of 2nd Tactical Air Force, reviewed the request on February 4th. The mission was unprecedented. Prison breaks were ground operations, not airstrikes. Bombing a prison full of prisoners violated every principle of precision bombing. The risk of killing the people you were trying to save was enormous, but Embry studied the reconnaissance photographs and saw a possibility. The Mosquito FB-6 could carry a 500-pound bomb load with pinpoint accuracy at low level. If the bombs hit the base of the walls, the blast would breach the structure without causing catastrophic damage to the wings where prisoners were held. The timing would be critical. The attack had to happen during the midday meal when prisoners were in the dining areas, away from exterior walls. Guards would be concentrated in the mess hall and administration building. The chaos from the bombing would create a window, perhaps 10 minutes, when prisoners could escape before German reinforcements arrived. Embry presented the plan to Air Chief Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory on February 8th. Leigh-Mallory approved with conditions. The mission would proceed only if weather permitted visual bombing. No blind drops through clouds. No bombing on radar. The crews had to see the target clearly, or they would abort. The risk of killing prisoners was too high otherwise. Pickard received his orders on February 10th. 140 Wing would execute Operation Jericho on the first day of suitable weather, after February 15th. The force would consist of 19 Mosquitos divided into 3 waves. The first wave, 6 aircraft, would breach the outer walls. The second wave, 6 aircraft, would hit the main prison building and guard barracks. The third wave, 6 aircraft, would serve as reserve in case the first 2 waves failed to achieve complete breach. 1 additional Mosquito would carry a camera operator to film the results for intelligence assessment. If you want to see how Pickard's precision bombing plan turned out against 3-foot-thick stone walls, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from World War II. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Pickard. The Mosquito FB-6 was the perfect aircraft for this mission, 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines producing 1,680 horsepower each, top speed 380 miles per hour, service ceiling 36,000 feet. But Jericho would be flown at 50 feet altitude across 150 miles of occupied France. The Mosquitos would fly so low that German radar would not detect them until they were already past the coastal defenses. The aircraft were constructed almost entirely from wood. Plywood fuselage, wooden wings. Metal was reserved for engines and critical components. The wooden construction made the Mosquito lighter than comparable bombers and nearly impossible to detect on German radar. Each aircraft carried 4 500-pound bombs with 11-second delayed fuses. The delay was critical. The bombs would penetrate the walls before detonating. The blast would blow outward and inward simultaneously, creating breaches large enough for men to escape through. Standard instant detonation fuses would crater the walls, but not necessarily breach them completely. Pickard's crews had trained for this mission since February 11th. Low-level navigation exercises over England, practice bombing runs on disused buildings. The pilots learned to identify the prison from aerial photographs. The navigators memorized the approach route. The bomb aimers calculated release points for different attack angles. Everyone understood that this mission required absolute precision. Bombs landing 50 feet off target would kill prisoners. Bombs landing 100 feet off target would miss the prison entirely. February 18th dawned clear and cold across southern England. Weather reconnaissance Mosquitos reported excellent visibility over northern France. Winds light, clouds ceiling above 3,000 feet. Pickard gave the order at 10:30 a.m. Operation Jericho was proceeding. The 19 Mosquitos took off from RAF Hunsdon between 11 a.m. and 11:15 a.m. They formed up over the channel and turned southeast toward France. The formation flew at 50 feet altitude. Fishermen in boats off the English coast watched the aircraft pass overhead, so low that propeller wash created visible disturbances on the water surface. The formation crossed the French coast near Dieppe at 11:42 a.m. German coastal radar stations detected nothing. A few observers on the ground saw the aircraft flash past, but by the time they reported the sighting, the Mosquitos were already 10 miles inland. The formation navigated using visual landmarks. Rivers, roads, villages. The navigators had memorized the entire route, every turn, every checkpoint, every landmark between the coast and Amiens. At 11:50 a.m., the formation passed Poix de Picardie, 20 miles south of Amiens. Pickard checked his watch, 8 minutes to target. The Mosquitos maintained 50-foot altitude. The pilots could see individual trees, farm buildings, vehicles on roads. The speed was 300 miles per hour. At that speed and altitude, reaction time was measured in fractions of a second. A momentary distraction, a slight miscalculation, and an aircraft would impact the ground before the pilot could correct. Inside Amiens prison, 700 prisoners were finishing their midday meal. The Germans maintained a strict schedule. Breakfast at 7 a.m., lunch at 11:30 a.m., dinner at 6 p.m. The prisoners in the South Wing knew their time was running out. Some had been told their executions were scheduled for tomorrow. Others suspected but had not been officially informed. The mood in the dining area was grim. Men ate in silence. Some prayed. Others wrote final letters that would never be sent. The guards were concentrated in 3 locations: the main gatehouse, the administration building, and the guard mess hall. Approximately 60 German soldiers and French collaborationist police. The guards had been warned that Allied forces might attempt a rescue operation, but they expected a ground assault, possibly commandos infiltrating at night. No one imagined an airstrike. At 11:58 a.m., a French civilian working in a field north of the prison heard aircraft engines. He looked up and saw 6 Mosquitos approaching from the north at extremely low altitude. The aircraft were in tight formation, 50 feet apart, flying in perfect line. They passed directly over his position at 300 miles per hour. The sound was overwhelming, twin Merlin engines at full power. The civilian dropped to the ground and covered his head. The first wave reached the prison at 11:59 a.m. The lead Mosquito, piloted by Flight Lieutenant Tony Wickham, lined up on the eastern wall. His bomb aimer, Flying Officer Lee Howard, had the prison centered in his sight. The aircraft was 200 yards out, 150 yards, 100 yards. At 50 yards, Howard released all 4 bombs. The aircraft pulled up sharply. The bombs impacted the base of the eastern wall, traveling at over 200 miles per hour. The delayed fuses armed. 11 seconds later, all 4 bombs detonated simultaneously. The explosion was massive. The eastern wall disintegrated along a 40-foot section. Stone blocks weighing hundreds of pounds were thrown into the air. The blast wave shattered windows across the prison compound. Inside the south wing, prisoners were knocked off their feet by the concussion. Dust and debris filled the air. The lights went out. For several seconds, complete silence. Then screaming, shouting, the sound of collapsing masonry. The second Mosquito in the first wave, piloted by squadron leader Ian McRitchie, attacked the northern wall. Same procedure. Low-level approach, bombs released at minimum range, immediate pullout. The bombs hit the wall precisely at ground level. The detonation created another massive breach. 35 feet of wall collapsed completely. The guard tower at the northeast corner tilted and fell into the compound. The remaining 4 aircraft in the first wave attacked the southern and western walls. Within 90 seconds, the prison's outer perimeter had been breached in 4 locations. The walls that had contained 700 prisoners for months now had gaps large enough to drive vehicles through. But the mission was not complete. The first wave had opened the outer walls. The second wave needed to breach the main prison building and destroy the guard facilities. If the guards recovered quickly, they would seal the prison and recapture anyone attempting to escape. The second wave had to eliminate that possibility. The second wave arrived at 12:01 p.m., 6 more Mosquitos, 2 minutes behind the first wave. Pickard led this wave personally. His target was the main prison building, the 3-story administrative structure, where German officers coordinated prison operations. His bombs needed to destroy that building without collapsing the prisoner wings on either side. Pickard's approach was from the southwest. His navigator, Flight Lieutenant Bill Broadley, called out distances: 500 yards, 400 yards, 300 yards. Pickard could see the prison clearly, smoke rising from the wall breaches, people running across the compound. He could not distinguish prisoners from guards at this distance and speed. His bomb aimer, Flying Officer Alan Butterworth, centered the main building in his sight. At 200 yards, Butterworth released the bombs. Pickard immediately pulled into a steep climb. The Mosquito roared over the prison at 50 feet, engines screaming. Below, the 4 500-pound bombs struck the main building's roof and walls. The delayed fuses armed. 11 seconds. The building's occupants had just enough time to realize what was happening before the explosions tore through 3 floors simultaneously. The main building collapsed. The roof fell into the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor fell into the 2nd floor. The entire structure pancaked into a pile of rubble 15 feet high. Every German officer inside died instantly. The prison's command structure was eliminated in a single strike. The remaining 5 aircraft in the second wave targeted the guard barracks and the German garrison building adjacent to the prison. More 500-pound bombs, more delayed detonations, more catastrophic destruction. The guard barracks disintegrated. The garrison building burned. German soldiers who survived the blasts fled the compound entirely. There was no organized resistance. The guards who remained were too stunned to respond effectively. The third wave circled above the prison at 1,000 feet. Squadron leader Dale waited for orders to attack with his 6 reserve Mosquitos. He watched smoke rising from multiple buildings. He could see people streaming out of the prison through the wall breaches. Some were running toward the open fields. Others were helping wounded companions. The escapes had begun. Pickard radioed Dale from his Mosquito. The target was breached. The third wave would not attack. Dale acknowledged and turned his formation back toward England. The mission was complete. Or so it appeared. Inside the prison, chaos reigned. The south wing had partially collapsed from the main building explosion. The blast wave had traveled through connecting corridors and destabilized the structure. Prisoners trapped on the upper floors called for help. Others were already dead, crushed by falling masonry. But the ground floor prisoners in the south wing dining area had survived. The thick stone walls had protected them from the worst of the blast. And now, those walls had breaches leading directly to freedom. Raymond Vivant was one of the prisoners in the south wing. 34 years old, resistance organizer from Abbeville. He had been captured in December 1943 during a Gestapo raid, tortured for information, sentenced to death. His execution was scheduled for February 19th, less than 24 hours away. When the first bombs hit, Vivant was in the dining area. The explosion knocked him down. Dust filled the room. He could not see, could not breathe. Then someone grabbed his arm and pulled him up. "Run! The walls are down! Run!" Vivant stumbled through the corridor. Other prisoners were ahead of him, behind him, pressing forward. They reached an exterior door. It was jammed. Someone kicked it repeatedly until it sprang open. Daylight flooded in. Vivant saw the breached eastern wall 30 yards away. He ran. Other prisoners ran with him. Guards shouted from somewhere. Gunshots. Vivant did not look back. He reached the wall breach, climbed through the gap, and kept running into the open fields beyond. The escape lasted approximately 12 minutes before German reinforcements arrived from Amiens. Wehrmacht soldiers and SS units sealed the prison perimeter. They recaptured some prisoners immediately. Others hid in nearby buildings or fled into the countryside. The exact numbers would not be known for weeks. Pickard's Mosquito was turning for home when German fighters appeared. 2 Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 26 scrambled from Abbeville airfield. The German pilots had heard the explosions and seen smoke rising from Amiens. They knew British aircraft were in the area. They found Pickard's Mosquito flying low over open farmland north of the prison. The FW-190S attacked from above and behind. Pickard's rear gunner never had a chance. The Mosquito FB-6 did not carry defensive armament. Speed and maneuverability were its only defenses. Pickard pushed his throttles forward. The Merlin engines roared. The Mosquito accelerated to maximum speed, but the FW-19s were faster at low altitude. They closed the distance. The first burst of 20-millimeter cannon fire struck Pickard's Mosquito in the port engine. The Merlin exploded. Flames streamed back along the fuselage. The aircraft began losing altitude. Pickard tried to maintain control. The Mosquito was still flying on one engine, still maintaining some speed. If he could reach friendly territory, if he could gain altitude, if the fire did not spread to the fuel tanks. The second burst hit the cockpit. Pickard and Broadley died instantly. The Mosquito rolled inverted and crashed into a field near Saint-Gratien, 15 miles north of Amiens. Both crew members were buried in the local cemetery by French civilians. The Germans later exhumed the bodies and reburied them in a military cemetery. The remaining 18 Mosquitos returned to RAF Hunsdon between 1:30 and 2 p.m. One aircraft had taken damage from ground fire but landed safely. All other aircraft were intact. The film Mosquito had captured the entire attack on camera. Intelligence officers developed the film immediately. The images showed clear breaches in all four walls. The main building completely destroyed. Smoke rising from multiple locations, and most importantly, people running from the prison in multiple directions. The initial casualty reports were sobering. 102 prisoners died in the attack, some killed by the bombing itself, others crushed when parts of the prison wings collapsed. 26 guards died. The German commandant and most of his senior staff were killed when the main building was destroyed, and Group Captain Pickard, the mission commander, was lost. But 258 prisoners escaped. Some were recaptured within hours. The Germans established roadblocks and conducted house-to-house searches across Amiens. They recovered approximately 150 escapees by February 20th. But 108 prisoners successfully evaded capture. The resistance network moved them to safe houses, provided false papers, smuggled them toward Allied lines or into remote areas where they could hide until liberation. The intelligence value was immediate. Several of the escaped prisoners were resistance leaders who knew German defensive positions along the Normandy coast. Others had information about Wehrmacht unit locations, supply depots, and collaborator networks. This intelligence reached SOE headquarters in London within days and was incorporated into planning for Operation Overlord. The political and morale impact was enormous. The Germans had believed their prisons were secure. They had believed Allied forces could not reach prisoners held deep in occupied territory. Operation Jericho proved otherwise. Resistance fighters across France learned that Britain would attempt seemingly impossible rescues to save them. Gestapo interrogators lost leverage. Threats of execution became less effective when prisoners knew rescue was possible. The Germans retaliated. They accelerated executions of political prisoners in other facilities. They increased security at prisons across occupied France. They moved high-value prisoners to locations farther from the coast. But the damage was done. The Amiens raid demonstrated a capability the resistance had only hoped for: precision bombing as a rescue tool. Historians have debated Operation Jericho for decades. Some argue the mission was too risky. 102 prisoners died, nearly 40% of the death toll from an operation meant to save lives. Others point out that all 258 targeted prisoners were scheduled for execution the next day. The raid saved 108 lives that would otherwise have been lost. The debate over whether the prisoners actually requested the raid has never been fully resolved. Post-war research found conflicting evidence. Some resistance members claimed they had asked SOE to attempt a rescue. Others said no such request was made, that the decision came from British intelligence independently. The truth likely lies somewhere between. SOE knew executions were scheduled. The resistance knew the prisoners were valuable. Whether a formal request occurred or whether Britain simply decided to act remains unclear. What is clear is the mission's technical achievement. 19 Mosquitos flew 150 miles into occupied France at 50 feet altitude, attacked a target in the middle of a city, breached 4 walls, and destroyed multiple buildings with pinpoint accuracy, and returned with minimal losses. The precision required was extraordinary. The timing was perfect. The execution was nearly flawless. The Mosquito FB-6 proved its capability as a precision strike aircraft. The wooden construction that some critics had questioned performed perfectly under combat conditions. The aircraft's speed protected it from German fighters until the mission was complete. Only after the attack, when Pickard's aircraft was withdrawing, did the FW-19OAs manage to intercept. The 500-pound bombs with delayed fuses worked exactly as designed. The 11-second delay allowed the bombs to penetrate walls before detonating. The blast force was contained and directed by the wall structure itself, creating clean breaches rather than random destruction. Later analysis showed that the bomb placement was accurate within 15 feet of the intended aim points. At 300 miles per hour and 50 feet altitude, that accuracy was remarkable. The loss of Pickard was felt across the RAF. He had been one of the service's most experienced low-level attack pilots. He had led the first 1,000-bomber raid on Cologne in 1942. He had participated in the development of Pathfinder tactics. He had trained dozens of crews in precision bombing techniques. His death represented not just the loss of a skilled pilot, but the loss of accumulated knowledge and experience that could not easily be replaced. Flight Lieutenant Broadley, Pickard's navigator, was equally experienced. He had flown 97 combat missions. He had navigated across Europe in all weather conditions, at all altitudes, in all tactical situations. His ability to guide aircraft to targets using visual landmarks and dead reckoning was exceptional. The Amiens mission required navigation without radio aids, without radar, using only maps and ground observation. Broadley had done it perfectly. His death 15 miles from safety after successfully completing the mission was cruel mathematics. The film footage from the camera Mosquito became some of the most widely distributed combat imagery of the war. News organizations across Britain and America showed the bombing sequence. Audiences watched the walls breach, the buildings collapse, the prisoners run. The footage proved that precision bombing could achieve objectives beyond simple destruction. It could create opportunities. It could save lives even while taking lives. The French civilians in Amiens responded with both horror and gratitude. Horror at the destruction, the casualties, the risk to their city. Gratitude that Britain had attempted something so dangerous to save French resistance fighters. The civilians who helped escaped prisoners hide knew they were risking their own lives. German reprisals against anyone aiding escapees were swift and brutal. But the help continued anyway. The underground network that moved the 108 successful escapees to safety operated for weeks after the raid, under constant threat of discovery. The German response evolved over the following months. Prison security increased dramatically. Guard forces were reinforced. Prisoners deemed high value were moved to facilities deep inside Germany. The easy targets disappeared. By D-Day, most important political prisoners were beyond the reach of rescue operations. But that was June. This was February. In February 1944, the Germans still believed their control of occupied France was absolute. Operation Jericho challenged that belief. The 140 Wing continued operations through the spring of 1944. More low-level strikes against tactical targets, railway junctions, bridges, V-weapon sites. The Mosquitos became the RAF's primary precision strike aircraft, fast enough to avoid interception, accurate enough to hit targets that heavy bombers could not approach, versatile enough to adapt to any mission profile. Operation Jericho was not repeated. No other prison break was attempted using aerial bombing. The risks were too high. The casualties were too significant. The conditions that made Amiens possible, a relatively isolated prison with clearly defined wall structures and open escape routes, did not exist at other facilities. Jericho was unique, but the mission demonstrated a principle that would influence military operations for decades. Air power could achieve objectives beyond destruction. Precision could create opportunities that overwhelming force could not. Sometimes, the right tool, in the right hands, at the right moment, could change outcomes in ways that no amount of conventional force could match. The 108 prisoners who successfully escaped included resistance leaders who continued fighting the occupation. They provided intelligence that helped plan the Normandy invasion. They organized sabotage operations that disrupted German supply lines during the Allied breakout. They survived the war and helped rebuild France. Some became politicians. Others returned to ordinary life. All of them carried the memory of February 18, 1944. The day British bombers blew open their prison walls and gave them one chance to run. Raymond Vivant was one of those who escaped. He evaded capture for 3 days. The resistance hid him in a barn outside Amiens. They provided civilian clothes and false identity papers. He traveled south through a network of safe houses. By March, he had reached Free French forces in Algeria. He returned to France with the liberation and found his family alive. He spent the rest of his life in Abbeville, never forgetting the morning when Mosquito engines overhead meant freedom instead of death. The memorial at Amiens prison was erected in 1964, 20 years after the raid. It lists the names of the 102 prisoners who died in the attack. It lists the names of the 258 who were freed. And it lists Group Captain Percy Charles Pickard and Flight Lieutenant Bill Broadley, who died completing their mission. The memorial stands at the location where the Eastern Wall was breached. The wall was rebuilt after the war, but a section remains open, preserved as it was on February 18, 1944. A permanent gap. A reminder that some walls can be brought down if someone is willing to try. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots who breached prison walls with pinpoint precision. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Group Captain Pickard and the Amiens raid don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.